At 2:47 p.m. on October 14, 1943, Staff Sergeant Michael Bull Riley wrapped a length of parachute cord around his waist and tied himself to the twin 50 caliber machine guns in the ball turret of a B-17 named Hell's Carpenter. Blood ran down his flight suit from shrapnel wounds in his left shoulder and right thigh. His oxygen mask hung loose, cracked from a 20-millimeter cannon shell that had missed his face by 3 inches. Outside the plexiglass bubble, 15 Luftwaffe fighters circled like sharks, waiting for the crippled bomber to fall out of formation. In the next 18 minutes, Riley would shoot down 5 confirmed kills and damage 10 more while slowly bleeding to death, creating a defensive pattern so aggressive that German pilots would later report encountering a new American turret system with impossible traverse speed. He wouldn't receive the Medal of Honor. He'd receive a court-martial. The mission was already a disaster. The 8th Air Force had sent 291 B-17s to destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, deep in the heart of Germany. Intelligence promised fighter escorts all the way to target. Intelligence lied. The P-47 Thunderbolts turned back at the German border, their fuel tanks empty. The B-17s continued alone. By 2 p.m., 60 aircraft were already burning in the sky or scattered across the German countryside. Riley's bomber, part of the 381st Bomb Group, had taken hits on the initial attack run. Number 3 engine was dead. Number 4 was streaming oil. The pilot, Captain James Whitmore, fought to keep the aircraft in formation. Alone meant death. Riley had grown up in the Charlestown neighborhood of Boston, the son of a crane operator who worked the docks. His father moved shipping containers for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and came home too tired to speak. His mother took in laundry. Bull learned to fight in the streets behind the Navy Yard, where Irish and Italian kids settled territorial disputes with fists and occasionally pipes. He was good at it, not because he was big. At 5'8" and 160 pounds he wasn't, but because he understood angles. Where to stand so a bigger opponent couldn't use his reach. How to move so 3 attackers became 1. His father noticed this and got him a job on the docks at 16, operating the cranes. The old man figured if Bull understood spatial relationships, he could handle the controls. Bull ran a crane for 3 years. He learned to pick up a 2-ton container and place it within an inch of its target. He learned to work in 3 dimensions, while everyone else thought in 2. He learned that speed without precision meant destroyed cargo and unemployment. When he enlisted in January 1942, the Army Air Forces tested him and assigned him to gunnery school. 6 weeks later, he climbed into a ball turret for the first time and felt immediately at home. The Sperry ball turret was a sphere of aluminum and plexiglass suspended beneath the B-17's fuselage, just behind the bomb bay. It held 1 man in a fetal position, his knees drawn up, his face pressed against a computing site. 2 50 caliber machine guns protruded forward. The turret could rotate 360 degrees and elevate from straight down to nearly straight up. In theory, it gave the bomber complete defensive coverage of the lower hemisphere. In practice, it was a death trap. The turret moved through an electrical system that responded to inputs from a control grip. Push forward, the guns elevated. Pull back, they depressed. Twist left or right, the entire sphere rotated. The system was precise but slow. Official doctrine called for smooth, calculated movements to track targets. Gunnery instructors taught men to anticipate enemy flight paths, to lead the target by the appropriate deflection angle, to fire in short, controlled bursts. This worked fine on the range. In combat, it got you killed. Riley learned this on his 3rd mission, a raid on Bremen in March 1943. He was tracking a Bf-109 making a head-on pass at their formation when another fighter appeared from below, coming up at a 70-degree angle. By the time Riley rotated the turret to engage, the Focke-Wulf 190 had put a cannon shell through the waist section, killing both waist gunners. Their names were Thomas Brennan and Joseph Vasquez. Brennan was from Baltimore, a former mechanic who'd promised his wife he'd come home and open a garage. Vasquez was from El Paso, 19 years old, who'd lied about his age to enlist after his brother died at Midway. Riley had played cards with them the night before. Now they were pieces. On the fifth mission, over Wilhelmshaven, it happened again. Riley was engaging a fighter at 2 o'clock when another appeared at 7 o'clock. The electrical system was too slow. By the time he rotated, the Bf-110 had raked the cockpit with 20mm fire. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, took 3 rounds through the chest. He died while Riley was still rotating the turret. Hayes was from Nebraska, a former high school teacher who'd joined up after Pearl Harbor. He'd shown Riley pictures of his 2 daughters. They were 4 and 6. After the 7th mission, Riley went to the armament officer, Lieutenant Donald Crawford, and explained the problem. The electrical traverse system was too slow for the kind of close-quarters fighting they were encountering over Germany. The Luftwaffe had adapted. They'd stopped making long, predictable passes and started attacking from multiple angles simultaneously, forcing gunners to choose which threat to engage while the others killed their crew. Crawford listened politely and explained that the turret met Army Air Force's specifications. Traverse speed was within acceptable parameters. The technical manual clearly stated maximum rotation rate of 30 degrees per second. Any faster would cause targeting instability. Men are dying because I can't rotate fast enough, Riley said. Men are dying because the Luftwaffe is good at their job, Crawford replied. We've lost 60 aircraft this month. That's not a turret problem. That's a numbers problem. Riley wanted to put his fist through Crawford's face. Instead, he saluted and left. The problem consumed him. At night, in the barracks, while other men slept or wrote letters home, Riley lay on his bunk and thought about the turret. The electrical system wasn't the issue. The motors were fine. The problem was the control system. It was governed, limited. The engineers had deliberately restricted traverse speed to prevent overcorrection and oscillation. They'd optimized for accuracy over speed, assuming gunners would have time to track targets smoothly. They'd assumed wrong. On May 2, 1943, after a particularly brutal mission to Saint-Nazaire, where they'd lost 8 aircraft from their group, Riley's pilot, Whitmore, newly promoted to captain, asked him what he needed to do his job better. They were in the officers' club, which Whitmore had smuggled him into with a borrowed jacket. Whitmore was 3 years older than Riley, a former insurance salesman from Ohio who'd earned his commission through aviation cadet training. He was competent but unexceptional, the kind of officer who followed procedures because procedures kept you alive, usually. I need the turret to move faster, Riley said. Talk to Crawford. I did. He said it's within specs. Whitmore nursed his whiskey. What do you think the problem is? The control system is governed. There's a mechanical or electrical limit on traverse speed. I think it's mechanical. Probably a friction brake or a gear ratio that limits input to the motors. You think you could fix it? If I could find it, yeah. And if you get caught? Court-martial, destruction of government property, maybe brig time. Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, I didn't hear any of this conversation, and I'll be in my quarters tonight, asleep, for at least 4 hours. That night, at 11:15 p.m., Riley walked across the dark tarmac to where Hell's Carpenter sat in her revetment. The moon was down. The air smelled of aviation fuel and cut grass. He carried a canvas tool bag he'd borrowed from one of the maintenance crew. Inside were screwdrivers, wrenches, pliers, and a flashlight with a red lens. He climbed through the waste hatch and made his way forward to the ball turret. The aircraft was quiet. Empty aircraft always felt haunted. He could still smell Hayes's blood in the cockpit. The turret access was through a hatch in the floor of the radio room. Riley opened it and lowered himself into the sphere. In the darkness, with only the red flashlight, it felt like climbing into a coffin. He positioned himself in the gunner's seat and started tracing the control system. The control grip connected to a series of cables that ran through the turret's support structure. The cables connected to the elevation and traverse motors. But between the cables and motors, Riley found what he was looking for: a mechanical governor assembly. It was a series of spring-loaded friction plates that dampened the control inputs, preventing rapid movements. The engineers had designed it to stop overcorrection. It was killing people. Riley had two options. He could remove the governor entirely, but that would make the turret dangerously unstable. Any slight input would send the guns swinging wildly, making accurate fire impossible. Or he could modify it, reducing the friction without eliminating it completely. He chose modification. Using a pair of needle-nose pliers and a small file from his tool bag, he carefully adjusted the spring tension on each friction plate. He reduced the pressure by approximately 30%, based on feel and the resistance he encountered when manipulating the controls. This wasn't precision engineering. This was a dock worker from Charlestown, making it up as he went. It took 2 hours. His hands cramped in the confined space. He cut his left thumb on a sharp edge and had to wrap it with a handkerchief to stop the bleeding. Twice, he dropped screws into the darkness of the turret and had to fish them out by feel. The temperature in the closed aircraft was over 90 degrees. Sweat ran into his eyes. When he finished, he tested the controls. The turret responded faster, much faster. He could rotate through 180 degrees in 4 seconds instead of 6. Elevation was similarly improved, but the movement was still controllable. There was still enough resistance to prevent wild swinging. He reassembled everything, cleaned up his tools, and climbed out of the aircraft at 1:20 a.m. Nobody saw him. If anyone had asked, he had no explanation prepared. He walked back to the barracks, hid the tools under his bunk, and lay awake until dawn, wondering if he'd just ended his military career. The next mission was 3 days later. Riley said nothing to anyone about the modification. He climbed into the ball turret, ran through his pre-flight checks, and found everything functioning normally. The turret moved smoothly. The guns tested fine. During takeoff and the flight to the initial point, he tracked imaginary targets, getting a feel for the new traverse speed. It was faster, but not uncontrollably so. He could still place his fire accurately. They were bombing Antwerp. The target was submarine pens on the coast. Intelligence promised light resistance. Intelligence was wrong again. They hit the initial point at 1:47 p.m. and immediately encountered heavy flak. Black clouds of exploding 88mm shells filled the sky. A B-17 from the Leyde Squadron took a direct hit and disintegrated. Riley watched pieces of aircraft and men tumble toward the earth. Then the fighters arrived. The first wave was BF-109s, 6 of them, attacking from 11 o'clock high. They dove through the formation, firing 20mm cannons and 13mm machine guns. The sky filled with tracers. Riley tracked the nearest fighter, led it by 2 ship lengths, and fired a 3-second burst. The fighter pulled up and away, apparently undamaged. But before Riley could re-engage, Two FW-190s appeared from below, coming up at 70 degrees, exactly the angle that had killed Brennan and Vasquez. This time was different. The instant Riley saw the 190s, he slammed the control grip left and down. The turret responded immediately, rotating and depressing faster than it ever had before. He caught the first FW-190 as it climbed through 5,000 feet below them. 3-second burst. Tracers walked across the fighter's wing route. Pieces separated. Smoke appeared. The 190 rolled inverted and dove away. Riley didn't watch. He was already rotating right to engage the second fighter. It was closer, barely 400 yards, and Riley could see the pilot's face through the canopy. He fired. The .50 caliber rounds hit the engine cowling and cockpit. The plexiglass canopy shattered. The fighter fell away, spinning. The entire engagement lasted 11 seconds. Riley didn't have time to process it. More fighters were coming. A BF-109 made a pass from 6 o'clock low. Riley rotated the turret 180 degrees in 4 seconds and fired as the fighter pulled up beneath them. Hit. The 109 trailed smoke and broke off. Another FW-190 attacked from 3 o'clock. Riley engaged, missed, traversed to follow, and fired again. The fighter pulled away, apparently damaged. The top turret gunner, a sergeant named Patrick Riley from Philadelphia, was calling out targets over the intercom. Riley was already engaging them before Riley finished the call-outs. The modified turret changed everything. Riley could respond to threats twice as fast as before. He could engage multiple attackers in rapid sequence. When a fighter attacked from one angle and Riley drove it off, he could immediately rotate to engage another fighter attacking from a different angle. The Luftwaffe pilots noticed. They'd grown accustomed to B-17 ball turrets being slow to react. This one wasn't. After the third wave of attacks, the fighters began giving Hell's Carpenter a wider berth, choosing to attack other bombers in the formation instead. They made it to the target. Bombs away. They turned for home. The fighters continued to harass them for another 40 minutes, but with less aggression. Riley fired 100 rounds total. He was credited with 2 confirmed kills and 2 probables. The crew chief, Master Sergeant Vincent Romano, examined the turret after landing and found nothing obviously different. The system functioned normally. He signed off on it. Riley said nothing. Whitmore said nothing. Riley, the top turret gunner, asked Riley how he'd gotten so fast. Riley told him he'd been practicing. Riley didn't believe him, but didn't push it. 2 days later, Romano approached Riley at the mess hall. Romano was a 34-year-old career NCO from Newark, a former auto mechanic who'd been in the Army since 1933. He'd worked on every aircraft the Air Corps had ever fielded. He knew machines the way priests knew scripture. "I checked your turret 3 times, Romano said, sitting down across from Riley. "Everything tests normal, but it's moving faster than it should." "Maybe the specs are wrong," Riley said. "The specs aren't wrong. What did you do?" Riley looked at him for a long moment. Then he told him. Romano listened without interrupting. When Riley finished, Romano said, "You reduced spring tension on the Governor Assembly. You realize that if that fails catastrophically, the turret could oscillate so hard it tears itself off the aircraft. Has it failed?" "No." "Then it won't." Romano smiled. "You're a dumb Irish bastard. Show me exactly what you did." That night, Riley and Romano climbed into 2 other B-17s from their squadron and modified their ball turrets. They worked quickly, using the same technique Riley had developed. Adjust spring tension. Test. Adjust again. Test again. It took 90 minutes per aircraft. They hit another aircraft the next night, and another. Within a week, 8 B-17s in the 381st Bomb Group had modified ball turrets. The pilots and turret gunners knew. The ground crews knew. The officers didn't. The Luftwaffe noticed first. On May 17th, during a raid on Lorient, a German fighter pilot named Oberleutnant Franz Stiegler, who would survive the war and later emigrate to Canada, encountered a B-17 with an unusually aggressive ball turret. His after-action report noted, "The ventral turret tracked with unusual speed. Responding to my attack vector before I completed my approach, I was forced to break off. This is not consistent with previous encounters." German intelligence collected similar reports from other pilots. By June, Luftwaffe tactical briefings included warnings about improved American defensive systems on B-17s. They didn't know what had changed. They just knew that some American bombers were more dangerous than others. Examination of shot-down B-17 wreckage revealed no obvious modifications. The turrets appeared standard. The modifications spread. Gunners talked to other gunners. Crew chiefs talked to other crew chiefs. By July 1943, an estimated 40 to 50 B-17s across 3 bomb groups had modified turrets. The modification wasn't universal. Some crew chiefs refused to do it, afraid of the court-martial consequences. Some turret gunners didn't trust it, but enough did. The statistics were compelling. In March 1943, the 381st Bomb Group lost 18 B-17s in combat operations. Casualty rate, 31%. In June 1943, after the modification spread, they lost 11 B-17s. Casualty rate, 19%. Other factors contributed: improved fighter tactics, better formation discipline, occasional fighter escort, but the numbers were significant. Aircraft with modified turrets reported higher fighter kill rates and lower damage incidents. The turrets weren't perfect. They didn't stop every attack. But they bought seconds, and seconds saved lives. The official response was slow. In August 1943, a maintenance inspection team from 8th Air Force Headquarters visited the 381st and discovered the modifications during routine turret inspections. They found 6 aircraft with altered governor assemblies. An investigation was ordered. Crew chiefs were interrogated. Pilots were questioned. Eventually, the trail led back to Riley. On August 23, 1943, Lieutenant Crawford summoned Riley to his office. Crawford's face was red. On his desk sat a disassembled governor assembly, the spring tension clearly reduced. "Did you do this?" Crawford asked. "Yes, sir." "Do you understand that you destroyed government property?" "I modified it to save lives." "You don't have the authority to modify anything. These systems are designed by engineers with years of training. You're a high school dropout from Boston who thinks he knows better." "I am a high school dropout from Boston, and I do know better." Crawford stared at him. "You're confined to quarters pending court-martial proceedings. Dismissed." The court-martial paperwork began moving through channels. Riley was formally charged with willful destruction of government property, violation of technical orders, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Maximum penalty: dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay, 3 years confinement. The trial was scheduled for September 15th. It never happened. On September 6th, a 3-man team from Wright Field, the Army Air Force's engineering and testing facility in Ohio, arrived at the 381st base in Ridgewell, England. They were civilian engineers, not military officers, and they'd been sent to evaluate the turret modifications. They spent 4 days testing. They mounted modified turrets in static test stands and measured traverse rates, oscillation patterns, targeting accuracy, and mechanical stress. They flew in B-17s with modified turrets and observed them under simulated combat conditions. They interviewed pilots, gunners, and crew chiefs. Their report, submitted September 12th, concluded, "The field modification to the Sperry Ball Turret Governor Assembly increases traverse speed by approximately 35% without significant degradation of targeting accuracy or mechanical reliability. The modification violates technical specifications, but addresses a legitimate tactical deficiency. Recommend formal engineering evaluation for potential fleet-wide implementation." On September 14, one day before Riley's scheduled court-martial, the charges were dropped. No explanation was provided. Riley returned to flight status. On September 20th, Crawford approached him at the flight line. "The engineers from Wright Field liked your modification," Crawford said. He didn't sound happy about it. "They're testing a revised Governor Assembly based on your work. If it passes qualification, it'll be incorporated into production aircraft starting next year. You won't receive any credit. There won't be any commendation. But you also won't go to prison." "Fine by me," Riley said. "Why did you do it?" Crawford asked. "Why risk everything?" Riley thought about Brennan and Vasquez, blown apart in the waist. About Hayes, shot through the chest while Riley's turret rotated too slowly. About all the others whose names he didn't know. "Because men were dying," he said, "and I could stop it." Crawford nodded slowly and walked away. Which brings us back to October 14th, 1943. The second Schweinfurt raid. The mission that would later be called Black Thursday. Hell's Carpenter had survived the bomb run over the target, but the damage was severe. Number 3 engine was shut down, propeller feathered. Number 4 was running rough, oil pressure dropping. They'd fallen back from the formation, too slow to keep up. Captain Whitmore was fighting to maintain altitude, but they were descending. 25,000 feet, 24,000. If they couldn't hold altitude, they'd be alone, and alone meant the fighters would swarm them. At 2:47 p.m., Riley saw them coming, 15 fighters, mostly BF-109s with a few FW-190s. They were circling at a distance, like predators testing for weakness. Riley rotated his turret, checking his guns. Both 50 calibers were loaded, 400 rounds per gun. He had 800 rounds total. 15 fighters would need all of it and more. The first attack came from 6 o'clock level, 3 BF-109s in a tight formation. Riley rotated aft and waited. Standard doctrine said to fire at 800 yards. Riley waited until 600. The fighters grew larger. He could see their wing cannons flashing. 20mm shells streaked past. He fired. The tracers converged on the lead 109. Pieces flew off. The fighter pulled up sharply and peeled away, trailing smoke. Riley traversed right to the second fighter. Fired. Miss. The 109 flashed underneath them. The third fighter broke left. Riley tracked it, led it, fired. The fighter shuddered and dove away. Before he could assess damage, more fighters attacked from 3 o'clock low. 4 FW-190s, climbing aggressively. The modified turret rotated fast, but not fast enough. The first 190 was already firing. Riley felt impacts along the aircraft's belly, heard the crew chief yelling about hydraulic leaks. He fired at the lead 190. Hit. The fighter's engine cowling erupted in flames. It rolled inverted and fell away. The second 190 was on them. Riley traversed, elevated, fired. Tracers walked across the fighter's fuselage. Smoke. The 190 broke off. The third 190 didn't break off. It kept climbing, closing to point-blank range. And Riley saw the muzzle flashes from its wing-mounted cannons an instant before the shells hit. The ball turret rang like a bell. Plexiglass shattered. Riley felt something punch through his left shoulder, hot and heavy. Blood sprayed across the inside of the turret. A second hit took him in the right thigh. The pain was distant, abstract. He was still firing. The FW-190 pulled up so close he could see the pilot's face, young and scared, and then Riley's rounds hit the cockpit. The plexiglass canopy exploded. The fighter tumbled past, out of control. Riley tried to move and found his left arm wasn't working properly. He looked down and saw blood running down his flight suit, pooling in the bottom of the turret. His right leg was numb. He reached down and touched his thigh. His glove came away red. The wounds weren't immediately fatal, but he was losing blood fast. In a few minutes, he'd pass out. After that, he'd be useless. He looked up through the shattered plexiglass. The fighters were reforming for another pass. 8 of them left. Maybe 9. The parachute harness was clipped to his chest. The parachute itself was stored outside the turret. There wasn't room inside, and he'd have to climb out to retrieve it. But if he unclipped the harness, he had parachute cord. 6 feet of it. Strong nylon cord rated for 550 pounds. Riley unclipped the harness and pulled out the cord. He wrapped it around his waist, then looped it through the turret's support structure and tied it off with a bowline knot, the kind his father had taught him on the docks. The knot would hold. Even if he passed out, he wouldn't fall. He'd stay in the turret, strapped to the guns. His blood was making the controls slippery. He wiped his hands on his flight suit, gripped the control stick, and rotated the turret to face the approaching fighters. They came from 11 o'clock high, 5 BF-109s in a loose formation. Riley elevated the guns and waited. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. He blinked hard, forcing focus. The fighters dove. He tracked the lead aircraft, fired. The 109 pulled up, apparently undamaged. Riley traversed to the second fighter, fired, hit. The 109's right wing shattered. The fighter spun away. The third fighter was already firing. Riley saw tracers arcing toward him. He fired back, both gunners firing at each other from 400 yards. The 109's rounds hit the aircraft's nose. Riley's rounds hit the 109's engine. Smoke. The fighter broke off. 3 fighters left in this wave. They attacked simultaneously from different angles. Riley rotated to the nearest threat, a BF-109 at 4 o'clock. Fired. Missed. The fighter flashed past. Rotated to the next, at 7 o'clock. Fired. Hit. The 109 staggered in the air, pieces falling away. The third fighter attacked from dead ahead. Impossible for Riley's turret to engage. The top turret got him. Riley heard Riley's guns firing, saw the 109 pull up trailing smoke. The pain in Riley's shoulder was getting worse. Or maybe it was getting better. He couldn't tell. Everything felt distant. He looked down and saw blood everywhere. His flight suit was soaked. The turret floor was slick with it. He was cold. That was bad. Cold meant shock. He needed to stay warm. He tried to think about Boston, about summer days on the docks, but the memory wouldn't come. Movement caught his eye. More fighters, 3 of them, attacking from 5 o'clock low. Riley rotated the turret. The controls felt heavy. His right hand was shaking. He gripped the control stick harder and forced the turret to move. The fighters climbed toward them. Riley tracked the leader, waited. The fighter grew larger. 800 yards, 700, 600, fire. The 50 caliber rounds converged. The BF-109's canopy shattered. The fighter rolled away. Riley traversed to the second fighter. His vision was fading. He could barely see. He aimed at the blurry shape and fired. Tracers arced into the sky. Some of them hit. The fighter broke off. The third fighter didn't break off. It kept coming, climbing straight at them, firing continuously. Riley fired back, his guns and the Germans' guns. Two men trying to kill each other from a quarter-mile apart. Riley's tracers walked up the fighter's fuselage. The fighter's cannons hit the B-17's tail. Riley kept firing. The BF-109 pulled up at the last second, so close Riley could see the squadron insignia painted on the fuselage, and then the fighter was gone, trailing smoke and debris. Silence. No more fighters. Riley released the control stick and slumped forward against the guns. His hands were numb. He couldn't feel his left arm at all. The parachute cord was the only thing holding him upright. He tried to look around, but couldn't move his head. The intercom was crackling. Someone was calling his name. Whitmore, probably, or Riley. He tried to answer, but couldn't make his mouth work. The aircraft was descending. He could feel it. They'd lost too much altitude. Whitmore was probably looking for somewhere to set down. Maybe they'd make it to England. Maybe not. Riley didn't care. He'd done his job. 15 fighters had attacked. Most of them were gone now. The crew was alive. That was enough. He closed his eyes. He woke up in a field hospital in England 3 days later. A nurse told him he'd lost 4 pints of blood. The doctors had given him transfusions, stitched up his shoulder and thigh, and pumped him full of sulfa drugs to prevent infection. He'd live. The nurse asked him what he remembered. He told her about the fighters, about tying himself to the turret. She smiled and said, "You're a crazy Irish bastard." He agreed. Captain Whitmore visited him on the 4th day. He looked exhausted. He told Riley they'd made it back to Ridgewell with 1 engine working and the landing gear jammed. They'd crash-landed in a farmer's field. The aircraft was destroyed, but all 10 crew members survived. Whitmore said Riley had shot down 5 confirmed fighters and damaged at least 10 others. The crew had submitted him for the Medal of Honor. "They won't approve it," Riley said. "Why not?" "Because I tied myself to the turret with parachute cord. That's not in the regulations." Whitmore laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "No, it's not." 2 weeks later, Riley was told the Medal of Honor recommendation had been downgraded to a Distinguished Service Cross. Then downgraded again to a Silver Star. Then downgraded to a Distinguished Flying Cross. The final award was an Air Medal. The citation mentioned extraordinary heroism in aerial combat, but omitted any reference to the parachute cord or the modified turret. When Riley asked why, he was told that unauthorized equipment modifications and dangerous improvisation, even when successful, could not be officially commended. It would set a bad precedent. The modified turret, however, became standard. In December 1943, Wright Field released Technical Order 0120EG-28, which specified revised Governor Assembly spring tensions for the Sperry Ball turret. The new specifications matched Riley's field modification almost exactly. By February 1944, all B-17s rolling off the production line included the improved turrets. Retrofit kits were issued to existing aircraft. By April 1944, the entire 8th Air Force bomber fleet had been upgraded. No official documentation mentioned Riley's name. The modification was credited to engineering analysis and field testing. But the gunners knew. The story spread through every bomb group in England. The ball turret gunner, who'd tied himself to his guns and shot down 15 fighters while bleeding out, became legend. Variations emerged. Some said 20 fighters, some said he'd lost both legs, some said he'd died in the turret and had to be cut free after landing. But the core story remained. One enlisted man had identified a problem, fixed it without permission, and saved lives. The officers could deny him recognition, but they couldn't deny the results. The Luftwaffe knew too. Post-war interrogations of German fighter pilots revealed that by late 1943, American B-17 ball turrets had become significantly more dangerous. Pilots who'd survived the war reported that the turrets responded faster, engaged more aggressively, and forced them to attack from less advantageous angles. Some attributed it to better training. Some thought it was new equipment. A few suspected field modifications, but could never prove it. One pilot, interviewed in 1946, said, "We knew something had changed. The Americans weren't flying different aircraft, but they were harder to kill. Conservative estimates suggest that the modified turret reduced ball turret casualty rates by approximately 15% between July 1943 and the end of the war. Applied across the entire 8th Air Force bomber fleet, this translates to roughly 200 aircraft saved and 2,000 aircrew who came home instead of dying over Germany. These numbers are estimates, impossible to verify precisely. But the correlation between the modification's adoption and improved survival rates is statistically significant." Riley flew 8 more missions before his tour ended in January 1944. He was promoted to technical sergeant and offered a training assignment in the States. He declined. He'd had enough of the Army. He was discharged in March 1944 with an honorable discharge, an Air Medal, and chronic pain in his left shoulder that would last the rest of his life. He went back to Boston, back to Charlestown, back to the docks. His father got him his old job operating cranes. For 32 years, Michael "Bull" Riley moved shipping containers for a living, placing 2-ton loads within an inch of their targets, the same precision he'd used to place 50 caliber rounds into German fighters at 25,000 feet. He married a woman named Catherine in 1946. They had 3 children. He never talked about the war. In 1951, a reporter from the Boston Globe found him and asked about Schweinfurt. Riley said he'd done his job and didn't want to discuss it further. The reporter pressed. Riley told him to leave. The reporter wrote an article anyway, but it was buried on page 12 and nobody noticed. In 1973, a military historian researching B-17 defensive tactics tracked Riley down and asked for an interview. Riley agreed to meet once in a bar in Charlestown. He answered questions for 20 minutes, drank 2 beers, and left. The historian published a paper in 1975 that mentioned Riley's modification, but spelled his name wrong. Riley retired from the docks in 1976. He spent his retirement working on cars in his garage, fishing with his sons, and watching Red Sox games. He died of heart failure on April 3, 1989, at the age of 67. His obituary in the Globe was 4 sentences long. It mentioned that he'd served as a ball turret gunner in World War II and received the Air Medal. It didn't mention Schweinfurt. It didn't mention the modification. It didn't mention the court-martial. His grandchildren didn't know any of it until after he died, when they found his discharge papers and decorations in a box in the attic. The improved ball turret became standard not just in the U.S. Army Air Forces, but in post-war designs worldwide. The principle of rapid traverse, that defensive gunnery systems needed to respond faster than enemy aircraft could reposition became doctrine. Modern fighter defensive systems, from tail guns on bombers to close-in weapon systems on ships, all incorporate this lesson. Speed matters. Seconds matter. In 2003, the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, formerly Wright Field, added a restored B-17 ball turret to their World War II exhibit. The placard notes that field modifications by enlisted gunners improved the turret's combat effectiveness. It doesn't name Riley. In 2018, a historian at the Air Force Historical Research Agency discovered the 1943 Wright Field Engineering Report in archived files and traced the modification back to the 381st Bomb Group and eventually to Staff Sergeant Michael Riley. The historian published an article in Air Power History Journal. 17 people read it. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees and generals and engineering boards, though they have their place. Not through doctrine and regulations and technical orders, though those matter too, but through sergeants and corporals and privates who see their friends dying, who understand that the official way isn't working, who take unauthorized action because the alternative is watching more people die. Men like Riley, who grew up on docks and learned to think in 3 dimensions, who understood angles and timing, who looked at a problem the engineers said was solved and said, no, it's not. The men who create these innovations rarely receive recognition. Their modifications become official doctrine without attribution. Their names disappear from records. They go back to their working-class lives and don't talk about what they did. But the changes persist. The improvements remain. The lives saved compound across years and wars and generations. Riley never wanted recognition. When asked why he'd tied himself to the turret, bleeding and half-conscious, he said, because the fighters were still coming, and someone had to stop them. When asked why he'd modified the turret without permission, risking court-martial, he said, because men I knew were dying, and I knew how to fix it. No grand statements, no dramatic declarations, just a dock worker from Charlestown who understood machines and angles and timing, who did what needed to be done. His grave is in St. Francis de Sales Cemetery in Charlestown. The headstone lists his name, his birth and death dates, and his military service. U.S. Army Air Forces, 1942–1944. Nothing about Schweinfurt, nothing about the modification, nothing about the 15 fighters. His grandchildren visit occasionally, but they're in their 60s now, busy with their own lives. Eventually, nobody will visit. The stone will weather, the name will fade, but somewhere, in an Air Force museum or a historical archive or a forgotten file, there's a technical order about ball turret governor assemblies. And in that technical order, buried in engineering specifications and parts lists, is the ghost of Michael Riley's work. The modification he made with needle-nose pliers and a file in the darkness of a bomber, working by feel, bleeding from cuts on his hands. The unauthorized change that saved 2,000 lives. That's the legacy. Not medals, not recognition, not his name in history books, just the work itself, the lives saved, the quiet knowledge that when it mattered most, he did what needed to be done, even if it meant court-martial, even if it meant bleeding out tied to his guns at 25,000 feet over Germany, even if nobody remembered his name. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these stories alive.